Research Log 7249B. Chief Scientist Ven-Dax. Institution Galactic Biological Research Institute. Subject: Human Physiological Adaptability Study. Final conclusions. Computer, begin recording. A deep sigh echoes through the pristine laboratory. This will be my final report on Project Darwin X, and possibly my last entry as Chief Scientist of the Institute. After 50 years of studying humans, I must admit we were wrong. Completely, utterly, and embarrassingly wrong. The sound of liquid being poured into a container breaks the momentary silence. Yes, this human beverage they call wine. Another example of their inexplicable resilience. The fermented fruit juice that would kill most species, yet they drink it for, quote, pleasure. Absolutely barbaric. And yet, here I am, drinking it myself. They're contagious, these humans, in more ways than one. Where to begin? Perhaps with our fundamental mistake. We, the greatest genetic engineers in 12 galaxies, assumed that humanity's remarkable abilities must be encoded in their DNA. What else could explain their survival on that death trap they call Earth? Multiple apex predators, extreme temperature variations, constant exposure to solar radiation, plate tectonics, and atmospheric oxygen levels that should have caused spontaneous combustion in most carbon-based life forms. A bitter laugh follows. We spent decades trying to replicate their genetic sequence, attempting to engineer other species to match their capabilities. The Galactic Council poured trillions of credits into our research. And what did we achieve? Nothing. Because we were looking in entirely the wrong place. The sound of pacing footsteps fills the recording. These humans, they simply refuse to acknowledge their limitations. When we tell them something is impossible, they treat it as a personal challenge. When we explain that their bodies cannot possibly survive certain conditions, they laugh and prove us wrong through what they call spite. Do you know what spite is? I had to learn about it the hard way. Our most advanced genetic engineering couldn't create what these beings achieved through pure stubbornness. We can splice genes from 1,000 species, optimize cellular structures, enhance metabolic efficiency, and still fail to match what an average human can do simply because they, quote, felt like it. Another long sigh. Computer, make a note. The wine is actually quite good. Perhaps there's something to this human habit of drowning one's scientific frustrations in fermented beverages. Now, for the official record, let me detail exactly how our most ambitious genetic engineering project was repeatedly and thoroughly humiliated by these delightfully impossible Deathworlders. Computer, begin new chapter. The initial discovery. Computer, begin chapter 1. The initial discovery. Pour me another glass of wine, would you? No? Right, still haven't perfected that function. Another thing humans would probably figure out through sheer persistence. It all started at mining colony Braxis 9, in what humans would call their year 2157. Now, Braxis 9 was considered barely habitable even by our most resilient mining species. Surface temperature averaging 150 degrees Celsius. Toxic atmosphere. Gravity 2.3 times galactic standard. The mining company used exclusively robotic operations and, well, that was the plan until humans came along. I still remember watching the security footage. This human, Jack Martinez, walks into the colony administrator's office, looks at our mining operation, and says, what was the exact quote? Yes, you're doing it wrong, mate. Give me a team, and I'll triple your output in a month. The administrator, poor Zun Ra, tried explaining that biological entities couldn't possibly survive the working conditions. Martinez just laughed, and said, and I quote again, hold my beer. We didn't understand the significance of that phrase then. We do now. It's become something of a warning signal in inexplicable research circles. Within a week, Martinez had assembled a team of 12 humans. They modified some standard environmental suits, which our engineers insisted wouldn't be sufficient for survival. The humans called them good enough and went to work. The first day, 3 environmental alarms went off, 6 safety protocols were breached, and our medical team was in a constant state of panic. But the humans, they were fine. More than fine. They were singing. In conditions that would liquefy the organs of most species, they were performing what they called sea shanties over the comm system. The sound of liquid being swallowed quickly. By the end of the month, they hadn't just tripled production. They'd quintupled it. Our research team was assigned immediately. We took blood samples, tissue samples, genetic samples, everything we could think of. The results were, well, they were infuriating. Their genetic structure was remarkably unremarkable. Basic carbon-based humanoid configuration, nothing that suggested their level of environmental resistance. We spent 6 months trying to engineer similar capabilities into other species. The Rigelian test subjects lasted 10 minutes in the mining conditions. The enhanced door actions managed 15. Martinez and his team, they complained that their coffee machine wasn't working properly. We tried everything. Genetic splicing with extreme off-all species. Enhanced cellular regeneration. Modified protein structures. The best we achieved was a single Valerian worker lasting 1 hour, and that was after hundreds of millions in research funding. Meanwhile, the humans were organizing what they called overtime shifts because, and I quote, "the pay is good. The pay is good. The pay is good." They were voluntarily extending their exposure to conditions we considered unsurvivable because of economic incentives. Our xenopsychologists had a field day with that one. But here's the truly disturbing part. When we finally developed monitoring equipment robust enough to track their biological responses, we discovered something impossible. Their bodies were being affected by the conditions. They were experiencing strain and cellular damage. They just ignored it. Their bodies adapted, not through genetic superiority, but through what they called getting used to it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Our most advanced genetic engineering couldn't replicate what these humans achieved by simply deciding the conditions weren't that bad. It defies every principle of biological science we'd established. A loud thud suggests a fist hitting a desk, and that was just the beginning. Computer, remind me to requisition more wine. Mark that as urgent. Now begin new chapter. The coffee incident. This is where things got really interesting. Computer, begin chapter. The coffee incident. Yes, this one still gives our safety officers nightmares. And me. Especially me. Who knew a simple brown liquid could cause so much chaos? It started during our standard xenobiological screening protocol. Every new species undergoes toxicity analysis, basic procedure really. We test their reaction to common compounds found throughout the galaxy. Humans, as usual, decided to make this process interesting. Our lab assistant, poor sweet ran low, noticed the humans were bringing containers of a hot, brown liquid into the mining facility every morning. Following safety protocols, she confiscated a sample for testing. The preliminary results caused her to trigger a facility-wide contamination alert. The substance contained multiple known stimulants, addictive compounds, and enough acid to qualify as a low-grade industrial cleaner. Naturally, we initiated emergency protocols. Hazmat teams swept the facility. Decontamination chambers were prepared. And there we found our first human subject of the day, Lisa Chen, arguing with the safety officer. Her exact words were, "Listen here, buddy. I haven't had my morning coffee yet. So unless you want to see something really scary, you'll give me back my triple espresso right now." We didn't understand the threat at the time. We should have. The sound of more wine being poured. The situation escalated when we discovered that all the humans were knowingly, willingly, and enthusiastically consuming this toxin, multiple times per day. They called it coffee, and apparently it was essential for something they called dealing with Monday mornings. Then came the incident itself. During our attempt to study this phenomenon, we had gathered all known coffee samples in the main laboratory. Renlo was carrying a containment unit filled with various coffee cups when she slipped. The containment unit shattered. Coffee went everywhere. 3 different alarm systems activated. 2 junior researchers fainted from the fumes. But the humans, they stood there, looking at the spreading puddle of brown liquid. And someone said, "I'll never forget this. That's a waste of perfectly good coffee." Martinez actually got down on his hands and knees and mourned the loss. "Do you know how far we are from the nearest Starbucks?" he asked. We had to look up what a Starbucks was. Apparently, it's some sort of coffee temple where humans gather to perform their daily stimulant rituals. Naturally, we attempted to engineer caffeine tolerance into other species. The results were dramatic. And by dramatic, I mean catastrophic. The enhanced Xerillians developed hyperspeed molecular vibration and phased through 3 walls before collapsing. The modified Pandorans achieved temporary telepathy but could only broadcast thoughts about needing more coffee. And the less said about the Jovian test subject who achieved faster than light travel and had to be chased down in the Horsehead Nebula, the better. Meanwhile, humans were mixing coffee with something called energy drinks to create what they termed poor life choices. When we pointed out that this combination could theoretically punch a hole through space-time, they nodded and said, "Yeah, but I've got a deadline to meet." Our biochemists eventually broke down and asked how humans had developed such incredible tolerance. The answer? College finals week? We're still trying to understand what kind of hellish evolutionary pressure that represents. A long, defeated sigh follows. We had to officially classify coffee as a controlled substance, but make an exception for human consumption. The paperwork alone took 3 months. And you know what? During those 3 months, we discovered humans had started growing coffee plants in the station's air vents. Their dedication to maintaining a steady supply of this poison was almost admirable. Computer, note for future research, investigate this college finals week phenomenon. But first, begin new chapter, the gravity challenge. Because if you thought coffee was bad, computer, begin chapter, the gravity challenge. And remind me to update my will after this recording. The events I'm about to describe still make me question my career choices. The Galactic Scientific Committee had become, let's say, frustrated with our lack of progress in replicating human capabilities. They decided to organize a controlled experiment. A competition, if you will, between our best genetically engineered species and standard, unmodified humans. The chosen testing ground, the high-gravity mining platforms of Jupiter's core facility. We spent 2 years preparing our specimens. The finest genetic engineers in 12 galaxies collaborated to create the perfect high-gravity adaptation. We used genes from gravity-resistant species across the universe. We optimized muscle density, enhanced bone structure, improved cellular regeneration. The result was peak species Mark 7, a masterpiece of biological engineering. The humans sent their team selection via text message. It read, "Yeah, we've got some weightlifters who are up for it. They're pretty bored since Earth's gravity feels too light after their last competition. When do we start?" Weightlifters. Not genetic engineers, not scientists, not even specialized survival experts. Just humans who lifted heavy objects for fun. We thought they were joking. They weren't. The sound of pacing intensifies. The competition was simple: perform standard mining operations in progressively increasing gravity conditions. Our Mark 7 specimens were magnificent. They moved with perfect efficiency, their enhanced bodies adapting beautifully to the increasing gravity. Then there was Todd. Just Todd. A human who, and I quote, used to compete in strongman competitions but got bored. He showed up eating something called a protein bar and asked if we had a gym on the station. When we explained this was a serious scientific competition, he shrugged and said, "Whatever, bro." At 4 times Earth's gravity, our Mark 7s were performing optimally. Todd was complaining that his protein shake was too thick. At 6 times gravity, the Mark 7 showed the first signs of strain. Todd asked if he could play something called workout music over the facility's speakers. At 8 times gravity, something incredible happened. One of our Mark 7s began to falter. Todd noticed and helped them. He walked over, in gravity that should have crushed him, patted the Mark 7 on the back, and said, "Come on, buddy, it's just like leg day." We still don't know what leg day is, but the term now appears in 3 different exonobiological horror studies. At 10 times gravity, half our Mark 7s had to withdraw. Todd was asking if we could add more weight because, and I quote, "This is getting too easy." The remaining Mark 7s were watching him with what I can only describe as existential dread. The breaking point came at 12 times gravity. Our last Mark 7, the pinnacle of genetic engineering, collapsed. Todd was doing something called squats because, according to him, never skip leg day, even on high-grav planets. When we called an end to the experiment, Todd looked disappointed. He asked if we could increase the gravity further because, and these words will haunt me forever, "I'm trying to beat my personal record." The Galactic Scientific Committee demanded an explanation. We had none. Our instruments confirmed that Todd's body was experiencing the full effects of the gravity. He was simply choosing to ignore them. When we asked him how he did it, he said, "I just pretended the gravity was talking trash about my lifting form." A long pause followed by the sound of more wine being poured. We had to rewrite 3 laws of biology after that day. The Galactic Committee formally classified human stubbornness as an anomalous force of nature. And Todd? He left us his protein shake recipe. We tested it. It's toxic to every known species in the galaxy, including most humans. He called it pretty mild. Computer, begin new chapter. The breaking point. Because somehow it got even more ridiculous. Computer, begin chapter. The breaking point. An increased recording sensitivity. My hands are shaking too much to pour another glass of wine. This was when everything we thought we knew about biological limits shattered completely. Deep Space Mining Station Omega. 50,000 light-years from Earth. The facility was our crowning achievement, a perfect blend of technology and genetically engineered biological systems. We had crews of our finest specimens, each one tailored for specific extreme conditions. Everything was perfect. Until the quantum core started to destabilize. The emergency broadcast reached us at the Institute first. The station's containment systems were failing. Radiation levels were rising. Temperature fluctuations were off the charts. The artificial gravity was cycling randomly between 0 and 20 times normal. It was, by every scientific measure, unsurvivable. We immediately dispatched our emergency response Mark 12s, the pinnacle of our genetic engineering program, designed to survive exactly these conditions. Cost: roughly the GDP of 3 mid-sized star systems. Each one was perfection incarnate. But there was a human mining vessel closer to the station. The GSS Dwayne Johnson, and yes, they named their ship that, and no, I still don't understand the reference. They responded to the distress call first. Their message to Central Command: hold our beer. All of our beers. The captain, Sarah O'Connor, didn't even wait for authorization. Her exact words over the comm were, "Yeah, looks pretty bad. We're going in. Someone's got to help those folks, and we're here now." When our scientists frantically explained the conditions were beyond survivable parameters, she laughed, and said, "Sounds like Tuesday." The sound of a fist hitting a desk. Do you know what they did? They jury-rigged their environmental suits with duct tape. Duct tape. A technology so primitive it barely qualifies as technology. When we pointed out the suits wouldn't hold against the radiation, Chief Engineer Patel said, and I quote, "The suits don't need to hold forever. They just need to hold long enough." They went in. They went in. A team of completely unmodified humans, protected by improvised equipment, and what they called good old-fashioned stubbornness. The station sensors tracked them through conditions that would have killed anything else. By the time our Mark 12s arrived, you know what they found. The humans had not only stabilized the core, they were running an impromptu barbecue in the maintenance bay. Chief Patel had apparently noticed a way to use the residual heat from the core stabilization to, quote, make some decent ribs. Our Mark 12s are perfect engineered specimens. They just stood there. The humans offered them barbecue. Barbecue. In a room that still had radiation warnings flashing. When the Mark 12s declined, Captain O'Connor shrugged and said, "More for us." The final report was, "Computer, I need that wine after all. I don't care if my hands are shaking." The report showed that the humans had endured conditions 30% worse than what our computer models had deemed the theoretical maximum for survival. They did this while cracking jokes, complaining about missing a sports game broadcast, and apparently trying to teach our emergency response AI to play something called poker. When we finally worked up the courage to ask how did they do it? Do you know what they said? Captain O'Connor looked at me, barbecue sauce still on her chin, and said, "Well, the way I see it, dying wasn't really an option. We had people counting on us, plus it was Patel's turn to buy drinks after shift." A long, heavy silence. 50 years of genetic engineering. Countless billions in research. The finest minds in the galaxy. And we were outperformed by humans who refused to die because it would inconvenience their drinking schedule. Computer. Begin new chapter. The revelation. Because after that day, everything changed. Computer, begin chapter. The revelation. And yes, I'm opening a second bottle of wine. Don't judge me. This is the part where I have to admit that everything I believed about genetic science was incomplete. It happened during the post-crisis debriefing at Station Omega. I was reviewing the medical scans of the human rescue team, comparing them to our Mark 12s, when Captain O'Connor walked by and glanced at my screens. She said something that changed everything. "You guys are really overthinking this whole survival thing." I nearly dropped my data pad. Overthinking? Overthinking? We had spent decades perfecting genetic sequences. Our modifications were works of art. How dare she suggest, but then she continued. "Look," she said, stealing my stylus and drawing a crude stick figure on my trillion-credit holographic display. "Humans don't survive because we're built different. We survive because we're too stubborn to die and too curious to quit. Also, we're really good at turning probably impossible into hold my beer and watch this." Something clicked in my mind. All our failures, all our frustrated attempts to replicate human capabilities, we had been trying to engineer the wrong thing. We had focused on making bodies that could survive anything, when we should have been studying the human ability to simply decide that survival was non-negotiable. The evidence was everywhere. The mining colony humans who ignored lethal conditions because the pay was good. Todd treating crushing gravity like a personal challenge. The Dwayne Johnson's crew treating a quantum core meltdown like an inconvenient delay to their drinking plans. The sound of hysterical laughter. Do you understand what this means? We can't engineer human survival abilities because they're not biological. They're psychological. They survive because they refuse to accept that they can't. Because someone bet them they couldn't. Because they're bored. It's like trying to genetically engineer a sense of humor or stubborn optimism, or that uniquely human ability to look at certain death and say, "Nah, I don't feel like dying today, thanks." Computer, mark this as my official recommendation. Discontinue all attempts to replicate human survival capabilities through genetic engineering. It's pointless. We might as well try to engineer spite, or sarcasm, or whatever psychological quirk makes humans drink coffee. Instead, I suggest we focus on studying human psychology, though on future researchers, this may require consuming significant quantities of alcohol. Trust me on this one. A long sigh, followed by the sound of wine being poured. Computer, begin final chapter. Because the greatest irony of all, the humans just offered to help improve our genetic engineering program. They said, and I quote, "It looks fun, and we're bored anyway." Computer, begin final chapter. And yes, that human music playing in the background. I found their rock and roll oddly suitable for writing resignation letters. This will be my final log entry as Chief Scientist. The Galactic Council has approved my proposal to establish the Human Psychological Research Division, though they did question why my budget request included a coffee machine, a fully stocked bar, and something called a ping-pong table. Trust me, they're all essential research tools now. But here's the true cosmic joke, the absolute pinnacle of irony that makes me question everything I've ever known. Remember those humans who survived impossible conditions? The ones who defied every law of biology we'd established. They got interested in our genetic engineering program. For fun, they said. As a hobby, they said. And do you know what happened? In 3 months, they improved our enhancement success rate by 300%. When we asked how, they said they'd just been messing around during their lunch breaks. They solved problems that had stumped our best minds for decades because, and I quote, "The genes look kinda neat." A sound of glass clinking. They're now offering weekend workshops to our genetic engineers. They call it Biohacking 101, because DNA is just spacey computer code. The waiting list is 3 years long. So here I am, 50 years of research later, drinking wine with a human engineer who just casually redesigned our entire genetic modification platform while eating something called a burrito. She says she got the idea while doing something called doom scrolling at 3 a.m. Final log conclusion, humanity's greatest strength isn't their genetics, their adaptability, or even their ridiculous tolerance for caffeine and alcohol. It's their ability to treat the impossible as a personal challenge, then somehow stumble into revolutionary solutions while trying to cure their boredom. Our mistake was trying to engineer better life forms. The humans? They just decided to be better. Consequences and basic universal laws be damned. And then they fixed our genetic engineering program because it looked like, and I quote, "a fun weekend project." Computer, final note, I'm converting our main genetics lab into something humans call a rec room, complete with coffee bar and gaming consoles. Our research productivity has never been higher. End log. And computer, thank you for listening to my scientific breakdown. Even if you are now running on human-modified code because they thought our AI could use, quote, more sass.